married by night, divorced by morning. The photos glow, crystal chandeliers, a sea of white flowers, a ring gleaming like a small moon. Then dawn cuts through the silence of a courthouse corridor, her heels tapping out a verdict the vows couldn't hold. 2 signatures, 1 decision, love as a headline, autonomy as the story. How does a fairy tale compress into 10 hours of clarity? Start at the aisle. A millionaire groom promising the world, cameras catching every promise. Now shift to sunrise, a woman who chooses herself. Between those frames, something shifted. Was it a prenup slid across a table minutes before the ceremony? The kind that confuses protection with possession? Was it a toast disguised as a joke? Words that drew laughter from the room and a line around her? Or the quiet instruction to staff, keep her phone close, keep her closer, that sounded like care and felt like a cage? Privilege versus dignity, public charm versus private control, security versus self-respect. The clash didn't explode. It gathered, detail by detail, until the party music faded and the fine print spoke louder than the vows. This isn't a spectacle. It is a study in power dressed as romance, in boundaries revealed exactly when they are tested. We will retrace the night hour by hour, the gestures, the clauses, the comments, and show how a bride walked toward the only promise she could keep. To follow the choice she made at sunrise, we first need to understand the promises made at sunset. Look closely at the edges of the celebration, the planner waiting for a nod before letting her mother approach, the seating chart that moved her friends to the far wall, the cocktail renamed for him. Nothing illegal, nothing loud, yet everything leaning one way. When love is real, consent feels expansive. When power performs as love, consent shrinks. She felt it in the space around her, in the way a question became an expectation, in the way a boundary became a bruise you cannot photograph. At sunrise, she chose a pen over a promise. We rewind. Before we rewind the night, hold one question in mind. What flips a fairy tale to a flight plan? Not a single explosion, but a seam that gives way, stitch by stitch. We will examine those stitches with care, because between vows and sunrise, choices gathered, pressures mounted, and one woman decided that love without respect is just leverage. This investigation is a reconstruction of 24 hours, mapped for clarity and for dignity. We will trace the sequence from ceremony to courthouse, highlighting what was said, what was asked, and what was implied. We will mark red flags as they surfaced, show how small restrictions compound, and explain the practical steps that turned doubt into departure. Where facts are uncertain, we will say so. Where behavior is alleged, we will treat it as alleged. The aim is not spectacle. The aim is understanding. This narrative is inspired by common, documented scenarios. It does not identify real individuals, and any resemblance is coincidental. Details are generalized, timelines simplified, and privacy protected. Still, the patterns are real, repeated across stories from courts, counselors, and survivors. When we reference legal concepts, we keep language plain. When we describe motives, we avoid certainty and center impact. Content advisory. This episode discusses coercive control and financial abuse. If those topics are difficult, please take care as you watch. We will maintain empathy, avoid lurid detail, and focus on decisions, dynamics, and safety. Resources will be noted later in the story. Here's the promise. We will show you the 24-hour arc as it unfolded, the celebration, the comments that landed wrong, the document that reframed the night, the quiet logistics of leaving. We will explain why last-minute contracts can function as pressure, why protection can read as surveillance, and why the weight of small demands often exceeds any single outburst. We will ask what partnership looks like when money enters the room, and how autonomy is defended without apology. To keep the journey clear, we will use contrast as our compass. Vows versus fine print, generosity versus strings, security versus self-respect. And we will end each phase with a bridge that carries us forward rather than dropping us into outrage. The goal is comprehension and agency, not blame. Now that the path is marked, we begin where every choice starts, with the people and the stakes they carried. We will listen for what they wanted, not just what they said they wanted. Security versus independence, speed versus trust, admiration versus control. By understanding their hopes and their blind spots, the timeline stops feeling random and starts making sense. The next step is simple and crucial. Meet them before we judge them. With care. Before the vows, there were two lives moving at different speeds. One life unfolded on marble floors under soft lighting, where assistants set the pace and decisions arrived pre-packaged. The other moved through crowded buses, family group chats, and late shifts, where choices were negotiated, not announced. Put them side by side, and you can almost hear the difference. Command versus consent. He is a millionaire by both math and marketing. Wealth is numbers. Status is choreography. He built a business that rewards decisiveness, turned timing into leverage, and learned that control protects the upside. His calendar is a wall of green blocks, every hour optimized, every meeting ending with an action item. He isn't cruel, he is efficient. He believes care is a system and love is a plan. Publicly, he is generous, photographed at galas, praised as a benefactor who gets things done. In private, habit becomes reflex. Risk looks like anything he can't predict. To him, speed signals commitment. Slowness reads like doubt. Contracts reassure him because they make feelings legible. Staff smooth his life, so he confuses comfort with clarity. He rarely has to ask twice. When he does, he hears no as a problem to be solved, not a boundary to be respected. He talks about safety, but often means control. She is working class and self-taught, fluent in scarcity and resourcefulness. She has held 2 jobs at once and still made time to deliver soup to her aunt on Thursdays. Her wins don't trend. They stack quietly. A reliable car, a repaired credit score, a niece's graduation cap paid off in small installments. Independence is not a slogan. It is the muscle she builds every day. Family is her anchor and her accountability. The group chat wakes before she does, buzzing with childcare swaps and jokes. Sundays are for her mother's table. Her non-negotiables are simple and firm. Honesty without ultimatums. Work she can keep, a phone that stays hers, money she can manage without permission. She does not need rescuing. She wants respect. They meet in the space between admiration and assumption. He admires her steadiness. She admires his drive. But their needs collide. He equates security with swift decisions and clean documents. She equates trust with time and conversation. He wants certainty now. She wants consent, always. He brings a blueprint, she brings questions. The clash is not loud yet, but it is present. Consider what each stands to lose. For him, a failed romance threatens reputation, the image of discernment and control that feeds his brand. He imagines headlines, investor whispers, friends smirks. The solution, he thinks, is to manage risk, accelerate, codify, contain. For her, the loss is not cosmetic. It is existential. Safety, dignity, the ability to call home unafraid. These are non-negotiable. A misstep here does not cost a headline. It costs a self. Privilege versus lived resilience shows up in tiny things. He gifts convenience, then expects access. She receives generosity, then scans for strings. He delegates discomfort. She absorbs it. When he says, "I'll take care of everything," he means relief. When she hears it, she also hears a door closing behind her. 2 good intentions, 2 very different outcomes. Even affection lands differently. His love language is provision. Cars, sweets, upgraded tables. He thinks that removing friction equals adding love. Hers is presence, listening, shared chores, someone who stands beside her, not in front of her. He sees the world as a sequence of solvable problems. She knows some problems are not solved. They are respected. These differences don't doom them. They demand translation. But translation requires patience and parity, and speed is his native tongue. The closer the wedding, the faster his asks arrive. Move apartments faster, change schedules faster, sign faster. He thinks urgency proves devotion. She feels urgency reduce her to an item on his to-do list. Promise versus pace, heart versus hurry. When class divides a couple, invisible scripts start directing the scene. He is used to concierge solutions, a call, a signature, a calm smile. She is used to community solutions, a ride, a neighbor, a pot of coffee at midnight. He trusts systems because they serve him. She trusts people because they have carried her. Neither is wrong. Together, they clash in secret, polite ways. Stakes sharpen when families enter. His friends toast to his great judgment. Her cousins remind her to keep her own account. He wants to display her, proof of taste and stability. She wants to belong without being absorbed. He hopes marriage will quiet uncertainty. She hopes marriage will protect her voice. These hopes cannot both be met by speed. He is not the villain of his own story. He is its producer. She is not an opportunist. She is a survivor who dreams. Each believes love should make life easier. Neither expects love to ask for a trait of identity. Yet pressure reframes questions. Is protection a promise or a perimeter? Is generosity a gift or a leash? The night will answer, but the stakes are already set. He risks embarrassment, ratings, and a blow to control. She risks erasure, isolation, and the soft violence of being managed. One can recover with a press release. The other must live with the consequences in her skin. Hold these portraits as we move forward. Next, we trace their origin story and the power imbalance that entered dressed as romance. Their story didn't begin with luck. It began with a list. He didn't wait for chance to introduce them. He asked his circle for women with substance, the kind who could move through a boardroom and a backyard barbecue without changing masks. She entered the frame through a friend of a friend, not as an applicant, but as a person who had never thought of herself as someone to be chosen. He noticed steadiness first, the way she listened before she answered, the way she laughed with her face. He planned their introduction like a launch. There was a charity event and a table positioned for photographs. He preferred controlled environments, so the romance arrived pre-packaged, pleasant music, discreet staff, timing that folded neatly into his calendar. She felt seen. She also felt managed, though she didn't have the word yet. Within days, messages became mail mornings. A driver appeared before dawn to take her to breakfast near his office. A table where decisions felt easy because the coffee came without being asked. He sent flowers that filled her apartment, then sent a cleaner so the flowers would shine. She had never been courted like this. It was generous and overwhelming. Generosity felt like care, and care felt like speed. Her boundaries were clear when they met. She kept Sundays for family, protected her work hours, and prized a phone that stayed in her own hands. Love bombing didn't look like flattery to her. It looked like solutions. When he offered a new laptop so we can FaceTime without freezing, she said yes. When he prepaid a weekend away, she asked about her schedule, then agreed, telling herself it was okay to bend once for romance. He translated care into access. He asked for her calendar so I can make things easier, and suggested adding her to his car service. She liked the convenience and the signal that her time mattered, but access flowed mostly one way. He didn't share his passwords or his plans beyond what she needed to attend. He called it simplicity. It felt like oversight. Grand gestures stacked. He cleared her credit card, saying, "Debt is stress. Let me remove it." She felt grateful and unsettled. Gifts are lovely. Ledgers are not. Gratitude turned into pressure the day he said, "I move fast because I know what I want." And the week filled with asks. Merge routines, move closets, meet a jeweler. They hadn't argued. They had negotiated around haste. He framed acceleration as romance. Why waste time pretending we aren't already a team? It sounded like commitment and felt like compression. She found herself explaining her life to his schedule. Who could watch her niece? Which shift she could swap? How to stretch her budget because his world relocated plans without notice. Gifts became obligations. Questions slipped into apologies. When he proposed, the moment arrived, dressed in polish, a rooftop, a line of candles, a view that made the city look like a promise. The ring fit perfectly. The timeline did not. Within days, the venue was booked. She told herself this was generosity, not control. But the date felt chosen for logistics, not love, and the plan began to move with or without her. Talk of a prenup surfaced as a footnote, not a conversation. "Standard. My counsel will handle it," he said, breezy as if he'd offered to call a car. She asked for time and independent advice. He smiled, promised a simple draft, and changed the subject to the tasting menu. Agreements are not villains. Secrecy is. Yet, secrecy thrives in speed. Each grand gesture created a cushion that muffled the sound of her hesitation. Access expanded in subtle increments. He sent a driver for her mother, so she's comfortable. Then added the driver to a standing route. He asked for a spare key, in case the florist needs in, then kept it. He arranged a security pass for her building, just so deliveries don't get lost, and now his staff knew her lobby. Access can feel like care. Oversight wears the same jacket. She tried to notice the difference. The meet-cute became a mechanism. Invitations replaced conversations. Her calendar filled with fittings, parties, and walkthroughs chosen by people who barely knew her. She loved parts of it, the dress, the music, and still sensed that choices were being made somewhere slightly above her head. Romance spoke in velvet. Acceleration spoke in silence. Each yes shortened the runway to ask why, and the space for her voice thinned even as the celebration swelled. He introduced her to his world as proof of belonging. Lunches with partners, seats at tables where servers knew his order, air kisses that told her she was expected to glide. She learned the choreography quickly. What she did not learn was how to slow it down without disappointing him. When she asked for a quieter weekend, he replaced it with better tickets. When she asked for time, he brought gifts. Romance versus acceleration, repeated. She still had agency. She used it to set small anchors, a lunch with her sister that could not be moved, an evening she kept off the grid, a password she would not share. He accepted each, then crowded the edges with new plans. Access became expectation. Oversight looked like kindness in a tailored suit. None of it screamed danger. All of it whispered imbalance. The origin carried the pattern, and the pattern carried risk. In another version of their story, someone would have paused the music and translated the pace. Contracts would have been discussed early and slowly, with 2 lawyers and no champagne. Gifts would have been matched with space, not claims. Instead, the current kept moving, and she tried to keep her footing on a floor that seemed to slide beneath her. The wedding date drew close, and the power imbalance quietly hardened into routine. This origin matters because it explains how consent can shrink even as praise grows. He was not a monster. He was a man accustomed to getting his way by arranging the world. She was not naive. She was a woman accustomed to carrying weight alone. Together they built a beautiful runway that left little room to turn. Next we mapped the moments where that beauty broke tension into signal. The escalation of red flags. It did not start with a scene. It started with a form. 10 pages, cream paper, a pen that weighed more than her phone. Minutes before the ceremony, a binder appeared with a smile attached to it and the word standard hanging in the air like perfume. A planner whispered that the notary was nearby, just to make things smooth. Protection, he called it. Efficiency, his best man said. She called it unexpected. The room around her kept moving, hairpins and boutonnieres and a violinist warming up. In that motion, the first red flag didn't wave. It rested, politely folded, waiting for a signature. Security versus self-respect. Promise versus paperwork. That is how escalation often looks. Quiet, reasonable, urgent, and exactly on his schedule. According to her account, the document was presented as simple, a placeholder they could revisit after the honeymoon. Allegedly, the independent counsel she requested had not been arranged. The notary, confirmed by the planner's timeline, waited in a nearby suite. He told her it was standard, that every sensible couple signed before champagne. He promised to initial beside any clause she disliked. He promised they could void it later if needed. Promises are not the same as process. She asked for time. Time was not available. There were photos, guests, a string quartet that did not pause for nuance. Love spoke in vows. The fine print spoke in deadlines. She signed nothing then, but the pressure did not leave the room. It rearranged the air. The pages, she later recalled, leaned less on division of assets than on behavior. Allegedly, there was a social media clause limiting public commentary about the relationship. There was a non-disparagement clause with penalties that sounded like fines but felt like silencing. There were spending limits framed as an allowance until joint accounts were established, paired with broad language about image management. Confirmed by photographs, a neon sticky flagged a section titled Household Expectations. None of this is illegal, and many couples signed carefully negotiated terms. The red flag was not the concept of a contract. It was the timing, the asymmetry. the push to agree without counsel. Vows promised trust, the fine print promised order. Both cannot lead, not at the same time. Outside the bridal suite, the choreography deepened. According to two guests, staff were instructed to manage her side of the family so the evening would stay smooth. Allegedly, that meant wristbands that determined access to certain lounges, a reminder to keep kids in designated zones, and a note that unplanned speeches were not permitted. Confirmed by a printed floor plan, her relatives were placed near the back wall, close to the speakers, far from the head table. Her mother tried to visit the suite before the ceremony and was gently redirected until the photographer finished. Protection versus surveillance can be a thin line. Keeping order can become keeping people in their place. Public charm carried the night. Private control carried the logistics. Invisibly, yet firmly. The phone rule arrived wrapped as etiquette. The ceremony is device-free, the usher said, which many couples request, confirmed by signage. E.t. Guests slipped phones into small pouches. Allegedly, an assistant offered to hold her phone personally, so the dress would sit right and the photos would be clean. He called it protection against leaks. She heard it as separation from her lifeline. Twice she asked for it back to text her sister. Twice she was told, 5 minutes, almost done. The rule made sense in public. It tightened in private. A document can be photographed. A feeling cannot. When power performs as care, access becomes oversight. A phone in another pocket turns convenience into control and silence into policy. She felt that difference immediately. At dinner, isolation hid in the geometry. Confirmed by photos, their head table ran long and high, turning conversation into performance. Her closest friends were split, some near the exit with vendors, others at a table that faced a pillar. Allegedly, this was to balance the room and give space to partners. Practically, it made private words harder. When she glanced at her mother, a coordinator appeared with a smile and a schedule. Speeches would begin soon. Please remain seated. She texted a friend, seating weird, but the message sat unsent in a pouch across the room. Public charm flowed easily, the room framed for his success. Private connection required small detours the plan did not allow. Generosity arranged the scene. Strings arranged the people. Then came the toast, each wrapped in warmth with a stone inside. A partner joked that he had upgraded her commute from bus pass to Bentley. Laughter rose. The cameras found his grin, and her face learned stillness. Allegedly, a cousin from his side compared neighborhoods and called the match philanthropic. Another speaker praised him for polishing rough edges, a line that landed like a file. He lifted his glass and said, "Love is providing," which can be true and can be a claim. Confirmed by video, she smiled and sipped water. Public charm is fluent in rescue stories. Private dignity struggles to breathe inside them. Every laugh cost a little air. Protection versus performance. Generosity versus ownership. Applause hides how sharp the edges are. Between courses, an assistant arrived with a leather folio, smiling like a friend bringing dessert. Just a couple of quick initials for the hotel, she was told. Incidentals, liability for the after-party. The paper on top was exactly that. Allegedly, the pages beneath extended the earlier document. A behavioral addendum, a photo release broad enough to swallow her phone, a travel clause that routed all honeymoon payments through his office. Confirmed by time-stamped snapshots she took later, the notary's card sat tucked behind the last page. He called it efficiency. She called it pressure in a tuxedo. Publicly, nothing changed. Privately, a pen pressed again at the edges of consent. The room cheered when dessert rolled out. She tasted nothing, not even the sweetness. After midnight, the small controls multiplied. Allegedly, she was asked to keep the dress on for one final set of images, then another, then just one more for a sponsor who would help the venue. Her shoes pinched. A handler escorted her to the powder room and back, cheerful and constant. A security guard stood near her cousins, smiling but present. When she asked to sneak outside for air, a photographer suggested a staged exit and brought her back under lights. He called it memory-making. She felt curated. Confirmed by schedule emails, the send-off timing shifted twice to accommodate arrivals. The party roared. Inside the roar, a quiet calculation formed. Public charm everywhere. Private choice nowhere. Protection sounded like direction. And direction didn't ask. One incident does not decide a life. A pattern does. By the time sparklers were counted and the car rolled forward, she had tallied a ledger no one else could see. A contract pushed in the rush. A family managed like logistics. A phone that traveled without her. A table that separated her from her own. A microphone that turned love into rescue. Allegedly, there was one more ask waiting upstairs, framed as a quick fix for insurance on the trip. Confirmed are the hours that followed, because they left a trail of messages and timestamps. The turning point was not dramatic. It was decisive. To understand it, we will reconstruct the night hour by hour and watch how a fairy tale became a flight plan. Start with the clock, not the kiss. At 2:15 p.m., confirmed by the stylist's text, hairpins clicked into place while a coordinator rehearsed the aisle-like choreography. At 2:28, a courier signed for a leather binder at the concierge desk. The receipt shows her fiancé's initials, a neat flourish where warmth lived earlier. The day ran on time. By 3:02, the florist's invoice closed out. At 3:10, a photographer asked for one last shot of the shoes by the window. Vows were coming. But somewhere behind the roses, fine print was taking a seat. At 3:38 p.m., the binder arrived upstairs with a polite knock. Allegedly, it held a standard prenup, plus a slim addendum labeled Household Expectations. The planner described it as routine. The notary, according to the run of show, waited 2 doors down. She asked for independent counsel, as she had before. He said, of course, we'll loop them in after the weekend. This is just for the file. Romance promised forever at 6 o'clock. Paperwork requested obedience before 4. The difference wasn't volume. It was velocity. Decisions that shape a life should breathe. These dashed. By 4:12 p.m., confirmed by a screenshot of her calendar, hair and makeup wrapped. At 4:20, a text to her sister read, "Still no lawyer. We'll explain later." At 4:28, she stepped into the dress. The binder moved with the flowers, always nearby, never quite alone. Allegedly, he offered to initial beside the toughest clauses, a performance of compromise that left the core intact. She declined, not signing, not agreeing, but the pressure lived on. Vows versus fine print, love versus leverage. The aisle looked straight, the path behind her bent. At 5:16 p.m., ushers collected phones into silk pouches. Device-free ceremonies are common. This one stretched, confirmed by signage. Guests complied. Allegedly, an assistant offered to carry her phone for the portraits, freeing her hands, protecting the silhouette. Twice she asked for it. Twice the assistant said almost done. Without a lifeline, silence pressed. The quartet tuned. The corridor cooled. Protection and surveillance can sound identical when only one party holds the key. At 5:52, she took a breath, counted to 7, and stepped toward the room that would clap. At 6:03 p.m., the doors opened. Confirmed by the photographer's timestamp, vows were spoken beneath a canopy of glass. He promised devotion, she promised partnership, and for a moment the room believed only in the music. The contract did not exist there, only breath did. At 6:29, rings found home. At 6:35, signatures filled the marriage license with ink that felt like sunlight. The crowd cheered, cameras shimmered, and the binder waited in a quiet chair, patient. Vows versus fine print. Love said yes. Leverage waited for a pen. By 7:10 p.m., place cards herded the evening. Confirmed by the seating chart, her friends split across 2 distant tables. His partners clustered near the stage. Allegedly, staff were instructed to keep pathways clear and surprises minimal. The result felt like tears. At 7:24, her mother approached, only to be paused until the planner approved. At 7:31, a message she tried to send about moving a cousin nearer to her stalled without a phone. Public charm poured freely in the toasts warming up. Private connection thinned until it was thread. At 8:05 p.m., the microphone lifted. Confirmed by video, a friend of his opened with benevolence, thanking him for rescuing a good woman from hard commutes. Laughter rose like confetti. At 8:17, Upner joked about neighborhoods as if zip codes were punchlines. Allegedly, someone at her table said, "Breathe." She did. The camera found her practiced smile, the one families wear when they know they are guests, not hosts. Public charm dazzled. Private dignity negotiated survival in small sips of water. Love as provision sounded generous. It also sounded like ownership. At 9:42 p.m., an assistant delivered a leather folio with the ease of dessert. Confirmed by coordinator's notes, she was told these were routine incidentals. The top page matched the pitch. Allegedly, beneath it, sat a photo release broad enough to control captions and a travel clause, routing all honeymoon reimbursements through his office. A notary's card waited inside the pocket. Love wrote poetry over cake. Leverage drafted policy under the table. She asked to review it later. The answer was soft, efficient, and immovable. It would be simplest to finish now. By 10:51 p.m., the staged images stretched. Confirmed by the photographer's delivery log, 3 extra setups were added for partners. Allegedly, she was asked to keep the dress on for one final capture, then one more for a sponsor. A guard lingered near her cousins, smiling like furniture. When she asked to slip outside, memory-making redirected her under chandeliers. Party noise swelled like weather. Quiet clarity began in the margins, the small space left when applause dies. She kept count. Folio, seating, toasts, phone, binder. Patterns, once named, refused to be quiet. At 11:58 p.m., sparklers sparked on schedule. At 12:24 a.m., confirmed by the hotel folio, the suite key activated. Champagne waited. So did the final ask. Allegedly, he framed it as insurance, a quick initial here and here to release the travel itinerary and ensure privacy protections. The language read like care and functioned like control. Device migration to a shared plan. Social posts, pre-approved by his office. Spending thresholds until accounts merged. She asked for the weekend to review. He pressed timing. Love said rest. Leverage said now. The word later became a test. At 12:41 a.m., the turning point arrived, disguised as efficiency. He dialed a number and handed her the phone. According to her account, a polite voice from his office congratulated them and offered to walk her through the form. Allegedly, the email on the screen included a packet titled Onboarding Spouse, referencing account permissions, brand alignment, and reputation safeguards. None of those terms are crimes. Together, they drew a perimeter around her life. She asked to save a copy. The answer was that it would be circulated internally. Ownership wore a grin. At 1:07 a.m., the room went quiet enough to hear truth. Confirmed by the suite log, she stepped into the small sitting room and read the lines again, out loud this time, testing how they landed against her ribs. The party's echo emptied. At 1:29, she opened the folio and found a business card with a direct extension. At 1:41, she set the card beneath her ring to keep it from sliding. Love is supposed to expand the self. Fine print was shrinking it. Party noise had been weather. Quiet clarity was climate. At 2:03 a.m., she reached the clause that sealed it. Penalties for speaking, incentives for silence, ownership disguised as care. The choice did not explode. It settled for her alone. By 2:26, her decision had a shape. Next, we move into immediate consequences and aftermath. When clarity arrives, movement must be precise. At 2:31 a.m., confirmed by photo metadata, she began duplicating essentials, snapshots of clauses, close-ups of signatures, a quick video scrolling through the addendum. She saved files to the cloud and emailed copies to an account he did not know. At 2:47, she called her sister, stayed on the line, and read the key language aloud. Witness turns panic into record. They agreed on a simple script. No confrontation, no debate, only steps. At 3:06 a.m., she found the small bag she had stashed under the sink before the ceremony. Flats, charger, cash, passport, a sweatshirt. At 3:11, she texted a neighbor to expect her for a few hours. At 3:18, she ordered a rideshare from a backup account linked to a prepaid card, picked a pickup point at the service entrance, and watched the car icon creep closer. She left a note on the desk for housekeeping with only 2 words and a room number for returns. At 3:27 a.m., she eased the ring into its box, took the business card from the folio, and slid both into the bag. At 3:33, Her sister messaged a screenshot of local courthouse hours. At 3:36, she stepped into the corridor, walked past the elevator toward the stairs, and let the door close without a sound. At 3:44, the driver texted, "I'm here." The car cut through empty streets toward daylight duties. At 4:12 a.m., she used the hotspot to upload the last files. At 4:29, her sister looped in a legal aid contact, who replied with the language for an initial filing. Divorce, with an alternative request for annulment based on duress, pending counsel. At 5:58, she reached her neighbor's building and slept in 10-minute stitches until first light. At 7:21 a.m., she stood in line at the courthouse, documents in order, voice steady. By 7:53, the clerk had stamped the petition. The paper named no villains. It named behaviors and dates. She requested no contact outside counsel. She asked for her own accounts to remain untouched. She kept adjectives out of it. Facts move faster in rooms like this. His response arrived as expected. At 8:11 a.m., calls stacked. At 8:19, a message from his office proposed a joint statement and an NDA to protect both brands. At 8:37, his attorney offered to pause filings and send a revised agreement by noon. Status management moves to contain the story. Accountability moves to secure the person. She replied once, "Please contact my counsel." Then she turned her phone face down. These steps were not dramatic. They were careful. Next, we analyze the pattern beneath them and why image plays so often outrun respect. What looks like romance at scale can operate like control at speed. That tension sits at the center of this story. Grand gestures signal devotion, but when the tempo quickens and choices narrow, love starts sounding like leverage. Researchers describe this early intensity as love bombing, a surge of attention, gifts, and promises that accelerates attachment. It feels amazing. It also compresses consent. Healthy generosity expands options. Love bombing replaces options with momentum. The test is simple. Can you say no without paying a price? If not, the gesture is performing power, not care. That difference will guide our analysis. Coercive control describes a pattern that turns everyday logistics into a net. The aim is not one dramatic outburst, but ongoing domination through isolation, surveillance, and micro-regulation. Scholars attribute the term to sociologist Evan Stark, and several countries recognize coercive control in law. The elements are recognizable here. Phone restriction framed as etiquette, staff managing access to family, documents framed as routine. Each item is defensible alone. Together, they convert care into containment. The mechanism works by shrinking room for refusal and then normalizing the shrinkage as sophistication, protection, or efficiency. It often replaces dialogue with unilateral permanent rules. Surveillance now hides inside convenience. Device-free ceremonies are common, yet control grows when access never returns. Phone possession equals communication control. When an assistant carries the only lifeline, etiquette becomes a choke point. Location sharing, account migration, and pre-approval of posts can masquerade as privacy protection while consolidating power over narrative and movement. According to digital safety advocates, abusers frequently weaponize shared plans, passwords, and cloud backups. The signal is not the tool, but the asymmetry. If one person holds the keys and the timelines, the other person is living on permission. Consent cannot breathe under constant custodial supervision. Financial abuse often reads as budgeting help at first. Over time, it becomes containment through allowances, approval gates, asset secrecy, or credit sabotage. According to the National Network to End Domestic Violence, most survivors report financial abuse as a tactic alongside other forms of control. Money is not just currency. It is mobility, privacy, and safety. When one partner sets spending thresholds unilaterally or routes reimbursements through an office, the other partner becomes a dependent, even inside luxury. The label matters less than the reality. Abundance without agency is still a cage. Gratitude culture can disguise that shift for years. Prenuptial agreements are not inherently predatory. When drafted well, they protect both people by clarifying expectations, honoring prior obligations, and reducing future conflict. Ethics hinge on timing, disclosure, and counsel. Many jurisdictions look for voluntary execution, full and fair financial disclosure, and terms that are not unconscionable when enforced. Some include cooling-off periods to prevent last-minute pressure. Best practice invites separate attorneys, plain language summaries, and weeks, not hours, between presentation and signature. A prenup slid across a table before vows is not clarity. It is leverage wearing linen. Consent requires breathing room and independent, unhurried advice, always. Class and gender scripts help pressure feel normal. The provider's story awards status for speed and decisive provision. The Grateful Bride story asks her to trade voice for access. When those scripts meet, oversight can sound like love. He says protection. She hears perimeter. He is rewarded for command. She is praised for adaptation. Research on relationship power dynamics shows that uneven resources intensify compliance pressure, especially when one partner controls venues, calendars, and staff. The fix is not less generosity. It is symmetry. Without symmetry, every favor accrues interest payable in silence. That debt compounds during highly public events. The romance narrative promises transformation through adoration. The strategy playbook promises predictability through control. At scale, they can look identical. Drivers, suites, a seamless timeline. The difference emerges when refusal is introduced. Romance makes room for no. Strategy treats no as a variable to solve. The wedding day pattern shows the conversion. Device etiquette became gatekeeping. Seating became sorting. Toasts became branding. Paperwork became policy. None of these pieces alone prove malice. Together they reveal intent. The map points one way. Public charm outward, private control inward, and momentum toward compliance. Consent narrows precisely when optics widen for spectators everywhere. None of this condemns contracts, security, or celebration. Boundaries and documents can protect both partners when built with transparency and choice. The ethical North Star is parity. If a term is good for one, imagine wearing it yourself. If the timeline comforts one, ensure the other can breathe inside it. According to family law practitioners, enforceable agreements usually reflect informed consent, reasonable terms, and ample time for review. What erodes legitimacy is secrecy, haste, and one-sided drafting. In relationships, what erodes trust is the same trio, especially when framed as kindness. Kindness without consent eventually feels like control anyway. Research on abusive dynamics notes that risk often spikes around transition points like cohabitation, marriage, or separation. Commitments raise stakes and can trigger intensified monitoring, rule setting, or punishment for resistance. That context helps interpret the wedding timeline. The public moment gave cover for new rules. The private suite provided the quiet needed to press them. Love asked for a dance. Leverage asked for a signature. The lesson is not fear, but literacy. When pace outstrips consent, slow down. When gifts require gratitude on demand, pause. When privacy shrinks, widen your circle quickly. Documentation turns instincts into protection and options. Stepping back, the pattern is coherent. An asymmetry of resources set the pace. Etiquette masked surveillance, generosity purchased influence, and paperwork converted romance into policy. None of this needed shouting to work. It only needed speed, ambiguity, and the social reward that greets spectacle. Our task is not to assign cosmic motives, but to decode mechanisms so people can spot them early. In practical terms, that means translating theory into scripts, boundaries, and next steps. Next, we convert analysis into usable guidance, distilling lessons and concrete moves for anyone facing similar pressure. We move into lessons and practical takeaways now. Durable partnerships are built in daylight, not under spotlights. This story carries practical lessons meant to empower, not to shame. A dream wedding can be moving. A lasting marriage relies on consent, parity, and pace you can breathe inside. Translate the drama into literacy. Learn what early pressure looks like, how to speak boundaries without apology, and how to leave safely if respect gives way to rules. When you can name patterns, you can choose rather than be carried. The point is not fear. The point is fluency. Start with simple diagnostics. If a loving gesture collapses your options, it is not love. If saying no triggers negotiation instead of acceptance, the energy is control. Watch for generosity packaged with urgency, for privacy that narrows while publicity grows, for logistics that become policies, and for small rules that only move one way. Notice when staff are told to manage your family, when seating places your people out of reach, when jokes reduce you or your neighborhood, and when your phone leaves your hand longer than ceremony etiquette requires. Notice when documents appear with deadlines that outrun thought, when independent counsel is discouraged or delayed, when reimbursements require routing through someone else, and when calendars and keys travel toward one pocket. Each item can look reasonable. Together, they convert romance into governance. Boundaries need language you can say under pressure. Try clean lines that do not invite debate. I'm happy to discuss a prenup with independent counsel for both of us, but I won't sign anything today. My phone stays with me. If you need privacy, ask. Don't confiscate. Seats can be adjusted. I want my mother at my table. Gifts don't buy access. Please stop linking presents to decisions. Jokes about class land as disrespect. If it happens again, I will leave the room. Fast is not romantic to me. I need time to review. Say each sentence once, calmly. If the push continues, end the interaction. We can revisit after a pause. Boundaries are not ultimatums. They are conditions for safety and respect. The person who values you will honor them without turning compliance into a test. A safe exit is not dramatic. It is procedural. Quietly duplicate documents, photos, and messages that explain the pattern. Then back them up to a cloud account the other person cannot access and forward copies to someone you trust. Pack a small bag in advance with flat shoes, charger, cash, meds, and a copy of identification. Stash it where you can reach it fast. Keep a backup ride option not linked to shared accounts. Call a witness while you review key details so memory becomes record. Avoid confrontation. Do not argue doctrine with someone treating love like policy. Leave when support is awake, move to a safe address, and contact counsel, a hotline, or an advocate to plan the next steps. Turn off location sharing, change passwords from a clean device, and keep communications brief and factual. A fair prenup is a conversation, not a countdown. Bring it up early, long before proposals or venues, and frame it as mutual protection. Each partner retains independent counsel, receives full financial disclosures with schedules, and reviews drafts in plain language weeks before signature. No alcohol, no wedding week pressure, no surprise inserts on letterhead the night before. Build a cooling period between final draft and signing. Make sure terms can evolve with life, and that both people can explain them without a lawyer in the room. If either counsel says pause, you pause. If timing or access makes you feel hurried or unequal, that is a deal breaker, not a detail. Good agreements clarify responsibilities without policing behavior, and they protect the person with fewer resources from dependence rather than pushing them toward it. Negotiation without duress is the only ethical path. Help exists even when nothing looks broken from the outside. Domestic violence hotlines in your country can safety plan around coercive control as well as physical harm. And many offer chat options if calling is unsafe. Local legal aid clinics and bar associations provide referrals to family lawyers who understand duress. Community organizations and shelters can arrange confidential consultations, housing, and tech safety support. Financial counselors at nonprofit agencies can help you separate accounts, build credit, and document economic abuse. Therapists and advocates can coach boundary language and prepare you for conversations with friends who may not understand why you are leaving a beautiful room. None of these steps require permission, and you do not need to wait for an injury to qualify for support. Ask early. The first call often turns fear into a plan. Finally, choose empowerment over shame. Wealth doesn't cancel your right to consent. Spectacle doesn't prove love. Speed isn't devotion. A dream wedding is a moment. A durable partnership is a practice. The measure is simple. Do you feel more yourself with this person or less? If you feel smaller, monitored, indebted, or managed, treat that as data. If leaving feels like betrayal, remember loyalty without safety isn't loyalty to you. Courage can be quiet. A screenshot, a sentence spoken once, a walk to the elevator at 3 a.m., a signature at dawn. You don't need to justify a no. You only need to live inside it. The future you protect is not merely freedom from harm. It is room for joy that never asks for payment. Partnership is a choice, not a prize. In the quiet between applause and sunrise, she chose herself, and that decision does not need an apology. The story we traced was never about a ring or a venue. It was about consent, respect, and the right to keep your voice. Wealth promised ease. Paperwork tried to claim obedience. She answered with clarity. Marriage is a partnership, not possession. When love widens your life, you breathe. When rules replace trust, you shrink. She refused.